President, we are today making a small step, a down payment toward getting the runaway federal spending under control. The spending bill that we will vote on today represents a $78 billion spending cut from that President Obama proposed for this year. It will be $38 billion from what the federal government spent last year. We must address the spending binge that our country has been on for the last 2, 4, 6 years. Spending cuts have been actually ignored. We have increased spending in the name of stimulus. The problem is that kind of spending didn't stimulate the economy in the private sector where the jobs are permanent. At the beginning of this year, the President proposed a budget that would spend $3.7 trillion next year with a $1.6 trillion deficit. The national debt is now $14.29 trillion. Under President Obama's budget plan, the national debt would double since he took office and triple by 2020. We then embarked on a very vigorous negotiation on this year's budget. Republicans insisted on cuts beginning now, which is the middle of a fiscal year, which makes it very difficult because the spending levels are already in place for a half a year. But we said no. We need to start right now, even if it is hard, even if it is in the middle of the fiscal year. And there was a hard negotiation. We know that because we had a series of 1, 2, and 3 week continuing resolutions that continued the government to go forward, but did not make the final decisions on finishing our fiscal year, September 30, with the cuts that were necessary. You know, part of the negotiation was to avoid a government shutdown. I did not want a government shutdown because in the end, that costs more. It costs more to do all the changes that are necessary to shut down the government and then to make the changes necessary to come back and put it back online. So I think we did the right thing by making those cuts, by taking that first step, and by not shutting down government so that so many people would have been left in the lurch. Federal employees, most certainly we were going to take care of our military, but they shouldn't have had to worry about it. All of the people who had vacations planned, who had airline tickets bought, who wanted to go to our national monuments and parks, all of the people in this country would have had some kind of disruption, and it wasn't necessary if we did the amount of cutting, and we did. But we cannot rest here because the real battle is going to be for cutting the trillions, not the billions. It is the trillions that are going to start getting the deficits down and bring our debt back into line. To do as the President suggested earlier this year and freeze spending at this year's levels would have been like someone who was on a diet saying, I'm just going to eat what I eat now and no more. But that doesn't mean that you lose weight. We all know that. And today, the federal government is spending $4 billion every day that we don't have. We add $4 billion every day that we don't have that is debt borrowed from somewhere else. We are borrowing 42 cents on every dollar we spend. Much of that is from the Chinese, and what are we doing? We are giving a bill to our children that is insupportable. That is not just a problem for our grandchildren in the future, it is a problem for today. This year, our interest payments on this mountain of debt have already cost us $190 billion. This year, $190 billion. By 2020, if we go at this rate, annual interest payments on the national debt will more than double to approximately $778 billion a year interest payments. Now you're going to $750 billion just for interest payments. We cannot allow that to happen. The president made a speech yesterday, and it was a call for action. Unfortunately, I believe the president called for the wrong action. The president says we've got to have taxes that go up and we've got to have spending that goes down together. He proposed raising $1 trillion in tax increases. That's $1 trillion in higher taxes for small business. It is $1 trillion in higher taxes for family farmers. That is not going to help our economy come out of the doldrums. Who is going to be able to hire people if they're going to know that they are going to have a tax burden and a regulatory burden that is going to keep them from being able to expand their operations? Washington has a spending problem, not a taxing problem. We wasted $1 trillion in failed stimulus spending in the first 2 years of the Obama presidency. Now, raising taxes by $1 trillion in the second half of his presidency to pay for a stimulus package that didn't work? Madam President, that does not make sense. The president also believes that a stronger federal government, a more powerful federal government, is the answer to our problems. He proposed yesterday to address Medicare and Medicaid costs by expanding upon the health care reform bill that was pushed through on a completely partisan vote that already is going to increase government. It is going to increase costs, and cuts to Medicare are going to pay for part of that increase. The president would give more power to the unelected bureaucrats on his new independent payment advisory board that is there to cut Medicare payments and reimbursements to doctors. We do not need a bigger, more powerful federal government to address the issues of this mounting debt. We are going to have a vigorous debate on what is the right answer. More powerful federal government and more taxes versus a smaller, more restrained federal government that promotes growth in the private sector to make our economy go. We are approaching the limit on the federal debt ceiling. That is where we must take a stand. That is where we have to draw the line in the sand and say, no more. We cannot raise the limit on the federal debt without reforms taking place that will show that over the next 10 years, we have a plan, and the plan is to cut back on the deficit every year. I think the total of around $6 trillion in cuts over a 10-year period is a responsible approach. We will debate some of the things in the proposals that have been put forward. What are the priorities in spending? What will promote growth? What will promote jobs? But we must have a plan before we raise the debt ceiling. Republicans and Democrats can agree on one thing. We do need a combination of spending cuts with revenue increases to get to the trillions that are needed to cut this debt. But the way we define revenue is the answer. The Democrats say revenue means tax increases, and the tax increases are on people who would do the hiring to grow the jobs. So you're putting a damper on the ability to reinvigorate our economy. Republicans are going to argue that the revenue comes from creating jobs, from having more people employed so they can help with our economy and try to help bring revenue in by being employed in the private sector. Republicans believe that the way to create revenue is build a vigorous economy, to have people working so that they are contributing to the economy, not people who are forced to take benefits because they cannot find a job in this stagnant economy that we all have acknowledged is here. So, Madam President, today, I hope that all of us will agree to take the first steps on the responsible spending cuts that will get us through the end of this fiscal year. And I hope that we will come together on next year's budget. The 2012 budget is what we are having hearings on. I had a hearing this morning with the Secretary of Commerce, the FBI Director earlier this week, to assure that we are spending for 2012 in a limited, responsible way and covering the needs of our country and also making the investments that will spur growth in our economy. But the big debate we're going to have is on increasing the debt limit at $14.29 trillion. We must do it with reforms that show the world that is buying our debt that we are going to have a responsible payback to them. I don't want the Chinese to raise the interest rates because they're worried about whether we have the political will to pay them back. We will have the political will to do it if we cut spending, if we increase revenue through job growth, not taxes. We will show the world that debt is good and that interest rates should stay low and that we should work for all of our good to have good trade agreements so that we can build up our jobs and buy things from outside, and those economies will flourish so that they can buy our products. That's what would be a win for everyone, and that's what we will be promoting in the next few months in Washington. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Montana.
I thank the senator from North Carolina. Madam President, I rise today once again on behalf